So today I want to give you part 2 of what I learned at summer camp, because it's still very much on my mind. And this is going to be an unusual sermon. This is not really about what happened at summer camp, except to say this. One of the things that I learned at summer camp is that young people are still very interested in demons and the nature of the demonic. Many of the questions they asked had to do with that. It probably helped that one of our teachers is studying that academically and working on a doctorate in subjects related to that, the history of the church. So that was pretty exciting for them to have kind of an expert on site and to ask questions. And I suppose that, and I hope and I pray, that some of them are in their churches today and they're hearing this gospel about the Gergesenian demoniacs and are thinking about what they heard at summer camp and what they talked about and what they thought. And I don't know everything that got covered. I know I put in my 2 pence worth at a certain point. But it is, I want to say that the young people are still interested in demons, and that's a good thing. And that's a good thing. Because it'd be very easy for us to say, oh, well, that's just, kids, they watch scary movies and they get into this stuff, and of course, what teenager doesn't flirt with the occult in some way or another at some point? It's just an American pastime. Shocking to hear that, but it's true. Let's be honest. How many kids, if they don't do it themselves, they know somebody who is? It's just part of the tapestry of our pluralistic universe that we live in. But it's a good thing that they're interested because they're going to ask questions, and we as a church need to be able to answer those questions and not sound like Theodoric the medieval barber, if you remember your old Saturday Night Live skits. Steve Martin as the medieval barber, medieval doctor, medieval judge, We don't need to sound completely backwards in our thinking. The truth is that the ancients, when we look at the church fathers, actually have very sophisticated understanding of these things. But how do they get there is part of the weirdness of this whole story. Because if you look at the Old Testament, there really isn't a whole lot in the Old Testament about spirits and demons. Most of the action is very much in the physical realm. It's kings like Nebuchadnezzar and these villains who are attacking the Israelites and the Philistines and Goliath and all that. But there is this whole underlying subtext of everything that's going on in the Old Testament, that there is a spiritual battle going on at the same time, though. That there is, yes, something going on in heaven, and that there is something definitely going on behind all these political machinations and all these wars. And you see it in the fact that there's a constant struggle of the people of God to remain true to the Lord, the God of heaven, and not to succumb to the worship of the pagan gods. And so you hear in the Old Testament, the gods of the pagans are demons. But even then, that word in Greek, daimones, is just spirits, right? It's not necessarily intrinsically an evil term at first. Later, it becomes associated with the fallen angels and evil spirits, as opposed to just, I guess, general spirits. I don't know if there are such a thing, really. Throughout the Old Testament, you don't see much of it, and there's not really a demonology that much in the Old Testament that's very visible until very late. In fact, I would say it's not even until what we call the deuterocanonical text that it really becomes outright. You see in the book of Tobit, for example, if you've read your Orthodox Old Testament, you know that it includes the book of Tobit. And the book of Tobit has a very interesting story about a young man named Tobias, his father's Tobit, and Tobias is in love with this young lady, but she's being assaulted by a demon named Asmodeus, I believe, is the demon I've talked to you about him before. And he's killing every man that she marries or falls in love with, and she can never follow through. And now Tobias is next on the chopping block. And so the Archangel Raphael comes to help them and to give them it's just kind of laid out with no explanation, which is why I love reading these things in the ancient stuff. There's no explanation. Take this fish and cook it a certain way and burn it this way and do this, and you will defeat the demon. No explanation of how or why. There's no systematic thinking here. Just the angel says, do this, and it'll work, and it does. And that's really, in many ways, the first time you see in a scriptural reference kind of a direct demon attack on a person on an individual basis. But then, just a few hundred years later, you get the New Testament and the Gospels. And the Gospels are overrun with demonic activity. We don't think about the Gospels this way, but we really need to look at them and understand that what is the primary thing going on is that battle between heaven and hell is come down to ground zero on earth and is coalescing around the person of Jesus Christ, the Son of God incarnate for our salvation, so that he can defeat the devil and his minions. And he does. Everywhere he goes, one of the first things that he's doing, besides healing the sick and being nice to the people who are cast out and forgiving sinners and uplifting the poor, he's also kicking the snot out of demons. It's a primary function of the Messiah's mission. And it's at the heart of what the gospel is about. Yesterday, we were blessed here at St. Mary's to do 2 baptisms, which is always a nice Saturday. We wish we could do more. Like in some cities in the old country, they're doing them around the clock. Those baptismal services, if you look really closely at them and you listen to the prayers, they also have as their central concern the defeat of the devil and the life of the individual coming to Christ. That's why we have exorcisms at the beginning of the service. That's why we reject Satan 3 times, confirm that we have rejected Satan 3 times, and then for good measure we exhale and spit on Satan. It's a powerful testimony to a reality of spiritual life going on in our lives that we need to be aware of and to address, and our young people need to know about it too, because they were probably babies when they came into this army. And they may have never been told that they're in an army and that their army is in a state of war. And if we are not telling our young people that, we are not doing them a good service, because they're sitting ducks for the enemy. There is an enemy actively engaged in destroying our souls. Now, how can you say this, Father David? It's the 21st century. So what are you talking about demons for? Talk about something else, something topical, something contemporary. This is as contemporary as you will ever hear. The devil is active and alive, doing his job really, really well right now. Everything that's going on wrong in the world has something to do with demonic activity. It's not the demons that you see in the movies and the televisions. It's not little guys in red suits with horns. Okay? The word demon means spirit. It's a spiritual reality. It's a bodiless reality. That's why we call angels the bodiless powers. The demons are also bodiless. To make the comparison, this is the hardware, but the soul is the software. They are just software, and they are viral code. Okay? They are there to disrupt the mechanism entirely and make it break down and fall apart. Now some would say, well, they just talk about demons because they didn't have a way to explain things like epilepsy or schizophrenia or things like that. Well, that would be fine if that's what the evidence points to. But all the gospel evidence points to very clearly that they understood the difference. And the Holy Fathers of the Church throughout the centuries clearly identified in their writings, they said there are various types of mental illness. Some are caused physiologically, some are purely psychological, and some are demonically inspired. And they understood that there was a difference between the 3. They didn't just convolute them all into one thing and say, well, it's a demon. You have a demon. That's lazy thinking. The fathers weren't lazy that way. They were very precise. And if you look at this gospel, I'm pretty sure if you talk to anybody who's an expert in psychiatry or psychology, there's never been a case in which someone was healed of schizophrenia or epilepsy and it jumped to a herd of swine. Or that it was healed of 2 people at the same time who shared the same hallucination. It doesn't happen. The problem with schizophrenia and things like that, it's a very painfully isolating disease because it's all inside your head. But the type of demon possession that we read about in the Gospels is something that transcends the individual subjective perspective and has an objective reality outside the person. And it manifests itself even beyond that person once it's cast out. And throughout the world today, missionaries who are going into places where people are not as clever as we are with our modern technology are encountering this type of activity all the time. Because they're the demons, don't have to hide, they don't have to be as subtle. Their work is much more out in the open. Talk to any missionary, and not just Orthodox, but any missionary of any sort. They will tell you. You go into certain parts of the world, and demons are acting like they did in the gospel still in those places. But here, we live in a much more subtle time. The devil works much better because he knows he can't be obvious here. He has to be much more under the radar. And so he inspires us through our little temptations. He inspires us through these little intrusive thoughts. He inspires not a good word, but it actually is the correct term because it means he's putting his spirit into us. And that's how he gets to us. And he gets us thinking that our real enemy is the person next door, the person down the street, the person on the internet that we disagree with, the person in political office that we abhor. Okay? That, St. Paul said a long time ago, we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers in the heavenly places. That's our battle. And the devil's done a really good job under modernity and in the materialistic view of letting people forget that he's there. By reducing everything to material explanations, he can go about and do whatever he wants without being observed. And think about it. With the rise of modernity and modernism and materialistic thinking, we've seen more horrific satanic things in the history of mankind than we did in the ancient world. And the Romans were awfully clever at it. They came up with all kinds of ways to torture and humiliate people and oppress people, and they have nothing on the Soviets. They have nothing on the communists, who preached a purely materialistic point of view, but that was profoundly demonic at the same time. So maybe I sound like a crazy person to you. That's okay. I don't have a problem with you thinking I'm a little bit crazy. I am. But I might not be wrong. What was it? What's his name from Nirvana? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. We have a spiritual battle ahead of us, brothers and sisters, in every single day of our life. And the primary mission of Jesus Christ was to come deliver us from the oppression of the devil, which leads to death. So he's saving us from death, he's saving us from sin, but he's also saving us from the cause of those things, which is the devil and his minions. It's a fundamental part of what it means to be a Christian. Our enemy is not our fellow human beings, even when we disagree with them, even when we have to fight them physically to defend our homeland. When you have an army attacking you, we still do it with a sense that this is not what our true enemy is, but that this is only being inspired by demonic forces. And we're only doing it defensively to protect our nation. Let's have that right spirit as we go forward in the days ahead. Let's remember what our real enemy is. Let's give each other a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Realize that everybody's fighting a battle that you cannot see. That we're all struggling with our own temptations, our own sins, our own passions, and it's not just us, but there are forces pushing us in that direction too that we have to fight against. The angels, the saints, the Mother of God, the church, the sacraments, all these things are here to equip us with armor and weaponry to fight the battle. If we don't see it as a battle that we're engaged in, we're going to get run over by it time and time again. So brothers and sisters, may God bless you, and strengthen you, protect you, embolden you to exhale and spit on Satan every single day of your life through your prayers. As was it St. Porphyrios, the new saint, the elder, said, when you pray and say your prayers and come to church, it's like you're shooting bullets and bombs at the devil. So don't be surprised if he doesn't reply with bonbons and candy. I think I told you this story a couple of weeks ago. Remember that. We're in a battle for our lives and the lives of our children. Christ is among us.
He is